morning to you. Thank you for leaving your dial on the floor of God's and state, and welcome to the platform, the pinnacle of all discussion. Following recent developments in terms of happenings around the Nigerian Correctional Centers, one of which includes the popular crossdresser, Mr. Idris Okuneye, the Honorable Minister of Interior, Honorable Dr. Olubunmi Tunji-Ojo, on the 30th of September 2024, inaugurated a 5-person investigative panel tasked with numerous objectives ranging from investigating alleged corruption, abuse of power, torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment against the Nigerian Correctional Service. That will be the focus of our discussion on the platform this morning. We're going to dive into the reason for the inauguration of that panel vis-a-vis the correctional centers here in the state, including some of the operations of the Nigerian Correctional Center. My name is Wisdom Thomas, and I have with me in the studio already, I'm talking about Dr. Uju Agomo, Executive Director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action Power, an Executive Committee member, African Security Sector Network, member, United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture, and member, including the Secretary, Independent Investigative Panel on the alleged corruption, abuse of power, torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment against the Nigerian Correctional Service. Good morning to you, Ma. Good to have you in the studio.
Yeah, good morning. I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's get started by, first of all, trying to understand the reason for the inauguration of that 5-member panel. I mean, it is what people read on the social media and hear from, platforms like ours that they will take. But hearing from you firsthand, what is the core reason for the inauguration of that particular panel?
And I think the immediate trigger was what everybody saw on the social media regarding the allegation that Bobrisky did not spend time in custody following his sentence. And having heard that, and the Honorable Minister in his wisdom felt that it was necessary to bring together persons, including people that were outside the system, as it were, people who they believe that would stand firm, or people in their wisdom that actually would help them unravel what was actually the true situation of things. So that was the immediate cause. But however, there are also the intention to ensure that you have a comprehensive look in terms of the problem, as well as profile effective and sustainable solutions. So that's in terms of the long term. So these were actually why the scope of the panel's mandate is what it is.
I learned that you have been visiting correctional centers in Abia State. Is that correct?
Yes.
Which parts of the correctional centers have you been to here in Abia State?
Okay, yes, but let me say first, following the inauguration on the 30th of September, what happened was that the members of the panel immediately began to go to the correctional centers that they required to get the accurate information regarding the immediate case. It was first the case about Bobrisky, but there was also another case in Kuje Correctional Center that had to do with Abdurrashid Minor's son, who was alleged to have paid some money into the private account of the in charge of Kuje Correctional Center. So that first phase took us to Kirikiri Medium Security Correctional Center, Lagos, Kirikiri Maximum Security Correctional Center, Lagos, Ikoyi Correctional Center, Lagos. Those three had to do with the case of Bobrisky, because he actually had cause to be in those three at different times. Now, they also went to the Kuje Correctional Center, which is in the FCT, in relation to the case of the Abdurrashid Minor. Having done that, the first report had come out, and I guess you will go into it if you do wish. But apart from that, there is now a second level of activities happening, and that second level is focusing on 8 locations where certain persons drawn from a cross sector of institutions have been brought together to do audit, and those locations include Abia. And in each of the locations where the team gets into, it visits all custodial centers in the state, and what it is tasked to do is, one, do head count of everyone who is in the custodial center cell by cell. So the team will go in each cell, will count it and then cross-check it against the data we have. Then secondly, cross-checked the warrants, and looked at the warrants. And thirdly, speak to the inmates, as it were, and bring some form of information on basics of certain specific issues, because the Honorable Minister wants to understand what is really happening. So yes, as part of that process, a certain number of persons that make up a team is actually currently in Abia State and visiting corrections.
So we are going to equally do our discussion this morning in phases. How about we start from what you've done so far in Abia State before we perhaps take a look back at the issue involving Bobrisky. Now, you've been there in the different correctional centers in Abia State. What were your observations? What did you see? You did mention head counts.
Yes.
And looking at the data made available to you, what are your observations? Was it exactly as it has been put out there?
As you know, that the mandate of let me also say that the audit team is important that the general public understand how it's constituted. The audit team is made up of people drawn from the National Human Rights Commission, the Legal Aid Council of Nigeria, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, both at federal and state level. It also includes members of civil society, for example, Plower and another civil society organization called CURE, and as well as representative of the International IDEA, who is also supporting this process. Now, for every team, there is a member of the independent panel, investigative panel, that is part of that as an observer, as it were. The reason I put that, so we have the members of the panel or a member of the secretariat support for the panel who just observes what they are doing in that. And the reason this is happening is that on the 13th of December, all of these committees will be making their report, submitting their report to the panel. So we are still, as it were, wearing our cloak as members of the panel. We receive the reports from the various locations, and this is still part of the process of what the work that the panel is actually doing. So in terms of your question in saying what did you observe, I think that will be reflected in the next report of the panel. But I could tell you the tax, which I have clearly mentioned, and the issue is to be able to have independent persons step into correctional centers and count and verify records and speak to the inmates themselves, and on the basis of that bring a report that the panel will look at, and as well as the Honorable Minister of Interior.
You said you spoke with some of the inmates there.
Yes, every team would do that, yes. Every team would do that.
Meaning you were there only as an observer?
No, every member of the panel. I mean, we could do anything we want to do. We could, guide whatever is. But for example, I ran the training for all of the auditors. The training happened in Lagos before they dispatched. And while I was on, I also personally spoke to people, as well as observed what the auditors were doing on the ground, because as I said to you, they will also submit the report to the panel, as it were.
Okay, how about the facilities you visited with your team? Which of them in Abia State?
We visited everywhere. We visited everywhere. The first day we were in Umahia, and we continue with that. With the second day, we were in Abachuku Custodial Center. We did on Aba 2 times because of the population. Like I said, everywhere the team goes, they will do so, unless for security reasons they cannot go to all the facilities. So it's important that those head counts are done and all the necessary comments are done. So yes, and as you know, your guess is as good as mine. The facilities in our correctional center is the reason why all of this effort is being done. We are not where we ought to be. There are things that shouldn't be. So what is important is to look at this from a very comprehensive.
What are those things that are not
clearly overcrowded? You know that the issue about overcrowding. You look at the designated capacity of the facility of the correctional centers, and you see how many are being locked up, and you see that almost in all cosmopolitan region locations and cities, this is the problem. I mean, Abakoso is the same. Umuahia the same. So we need to be able to look at how we are using custodial sentences or imprisonment, and it is not only for this state, it is same in most cosmopolitan places in the country, from Lagos to Rivers to wherever. So it is a problem for the nation.
Now, in terms of trying to relate with the inmates now, what were those things they said to you? I mean, look at their welfare in terms of feeding. Did they actually raise concerns that they weren't treated appropriately? I mean, in that aspect.
Are you talking about what the report of the committee, or are you asking me generally in terms of the general concern?
Yeah.
I can speak generally on these issues, as you know I always do, but the point is that, as I have said, the specificities in terms of what is coming out from the audit, I would rather have that report submitted to
for that, but for
yes,
for the
generally, I would tell you, and I'm speaking now in very general terms, we have overuse of pre-trial detention. You have high number of persons who need not be in custody, who are in custody in the correctional centers in Nigeria. You have a situation where you have even minor offenders who ordinarily should have been given non-custodial measures, but they are in custody and the government is feeding them. You have a situation where the facilities are overstretched, and that means in terms of beddings, mattresses some don't have. It also means in terms of all of the necessary facilities that relates to that, even in terms of the structure of the place. You also have a situation where you have a high number of persons who have not been convicted. What that means is that the correctional officers will find it difficult to proper rehabilitation for that person, because one, they don't even know where the person is going. And when you have a high number of people who need to go to court, it is very transactional. So the place is tense, and because of that, it's not conducive for rehabilitation. And if you are not doing rehabilitation very well, what that means is that you are having people who come out and go back again because more crime is going to be committed. It is also important to mention that part of the reason why we have a problem is for two major key reasons. One, the rates people are received into custody needs to be looked at. It's quite high. And the duration that they stay in custody. And when you talk about the rate they are received into custody, you need to look at what the police is doing. You need to look at what all of the agencies that are policing in nature, what they are doing. Because if it means that anybody, including people who you don't need to arrest, you are arresting them, and those who you don't need to charge, you are charging them. And those perhaps you should have, exhibited some discretionary practice in terms of even your police bill. You are not doing that. Then also, including court bill, you are not giving that well. The other point is about the duration in custody. And when you talk about the duration in custody, you need to look at the courts. So how long it takes people to go to court, adjournment, frequency of adjournment. And this is really problematic because the court and the overload of the court. So you see the problem you see in custodial centers is actually a problem coming out from the whole chain. It is part of the problem that the police is not doing due investigation. Forensic investigation is almost at nil. An arbitrary arrest is as high as anything. To the situation where you have problem in terms of lack of due diligent prosecution, to the point where you have courts being delayed so much. And my people say that justice delayed is justice denied. So sometimes you see somebody who will stay in custody for a longer period that even if the person was found guilty, they would have finished their sentence. So all of this complicates the whole situation. And then factoring it
and awaiting trial inmates as well into the entire
That thing. Is what the major problem is. Let me put it down like this. In the country, you have over 70% of those who are in custody who have not been convicted. That's the big problem. And that is looking at the country statistics generally. In some locations, that statistics is as high as 90%. 98, 93, 87%. Imagine if your facility is such. So tell me, it means that you have very few persons who are convicted. Now, why am I talking about the people who are convicted? I've told you before that when they are convicted, you know when they are going to go and you can plan. But that's not it all. It is not all the custodial centers in the country that are congested. There are about 255 or so custodial centers across the country. They are not all congested. There are facilities that are underlocking their capacity. But most of the ones that are located in the cosmopolitan areas, in the urban areas, are overstretched. If a custodial center is overcrowded, the state controller within that state can move the person or a person to another custodial center, of course bearing in mind the classification level of the inmates, the risk level of the inmates and the risk level of the correctional center. For the ones within the zonal coordinator can do that. The controller general can do that from one region to another. But see, if many of them are awaiting trial, it is difficult for him to do that because they have to go to court. Do you understand? That's why if we're able to have more people who are convicted rather than not convicted, it is easy to deal with this issue of population. Yes, it is easy because, as I said, it's not all of them that are congested. There are about 30 or so correctional centers that are very stretched, that are really causing the problem.
I assume that the work on your hands are really massive by any stretch of your imagination, and if everything you've said is anything to go by, a big job ahead of you. We're due for a very short break so that we can, if at all, gulp down H2O and then come back to respond to some of the questions. I have concerns in terms of going back to the Bobrisky issue, trying to find out from you while doing your due diligence and investigation. Is there any special treatment for special inmates and all of that? Did you see that happen firsthand?
I can we'll get to that point. I will be willing to talk about that because the reporting, we've made it public already. So
all right. So when we return after the break, that will be our next port of call. Stay with us. Thank you for leaving your dial on the floor of Godson State. Interesting conversation we are having so far in terms of the investigative panel, which actually looking at issues surrounding Nigerian Correctional Service. And here in the studio with me is Dr. Uju Agomo. Quite a long resume she's got, but then for the essence of this particular discussion, she is the member and secretary, the Independent Investigative Panel on the alleged corruption, abuse of power, torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment against the Nigerian Correctional Service. Thank you for staying here, ma.
Thank you.
Now let's talk about that aspect. Are there special orientation, special services for special inmates in the Nigerian Correctional Service? I mean, using that case of Bobrisky as a case in point, has it opened your eyes to see if such has been prevalent in our system, or is something which is just from somewhere in the blue?
Okay, thank you very much, and I think it's good to give you a little bit of a context. I have had over 8,000 visits to custodial centers in more than 32 countries. So I have seen the worst, I've seen the good and the bad, but with respect to the specific assignment that the panel was given, the investigative panel was given, as you know, it was first and foremost to know whether Bobrisky actually spent time in custody, because the allegation was that he never came in there. And what were the surroundings, issues around that. And I will tell you, as I said, the panel have issued its first report, and this has been made public. So first we found out that on the 12th of April 2024, he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment to Ikoyi Custodial Center by the court. Now, on that same day, the details were taken, he was checked, and they found that Ikoyi, the controller of the state said he felt that Ikoyi was not appropriate given the peculiarities about himself, about Bobrisky. So he felt it was necessary to move him to the Medium Security Correctional Center. Remember, it is within the powers of the controller of the state to do so within that same state. So on that same 12th of April 2024, he was moved from Ikoyi Custodial Center to the Medium Security Custodial Center. And he spent time, from the records we saw, from that 12th to the 22nd, that is a period of 10 days. We saw the records, we saw application that he made for self-feeding, we saw list of persons who visited him, which were about 39 within that stretch of 10 days. We went to his cell, we saw what the cell looked like and all the rest of that. But from the records also that, and the information that was provided by the controller and others, that he was moved on the 22nd from the Medium Security Custodial Center to the Maximum Security Custodial Center.
Okay.
That on the 22nd, and that's where he served all of his sentences. We saw all of that, and we saw also his cell. Now we went and saw the cell, and we looked at how the cell was. Now, from all of the record, we didn't see any evidence showing that he did not sleep in custody. However, when we went to the cell, that was in the maximum, and that was what we clearly stated in the report. His room was very well decorated. His room had wallpapers in the such that if you see it, you can never believe it was in custody. His door was padded, which made us to believe perhaps he had a phone inside there. He had humidifier because they were saying because he felt all of the things he had done, he needed the place to be cool, otherwise it will affect his skin and all of that. Now, it is also important to mention that there were other things we saw. All of the visits, of course, he had a lot of visits almost on a daily basis, which perhaps may have been linked to the fact that he was having self-feeding, because he applied, and inmates do apply for self-feeding, which means they will designate the person who will be bringing food for them on a daily basis. So every day he had a visitor, and all of his visits took place in the in-charge's office. That happened in medium security, that happened in the maximum. We saw that he even had an inmate who was attached to assist him, and we interviewed that person. So we spoke to other inmates who certified and was there.
I wanted to get to that point.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you relied only on the check-ins and the check-outs and the movements, whether you interacted with the inmates to confirm, just to reassess and be sure that it wasn't down to the bureaucratic processes of signing in and signing out. Did they actually confirm that he was there?
Yeah, the inmates, and I need you to understand, I don't know whether you know much about my background.
Okay.
I'm also a criminologist, okay? I'm actually an associate professor of criminology and security studies. So there's no way, I will not know what to deal with in terms of investigation. Also, part of the team panel is also, one that is very strong in forensic evidence, okay, and forensic, issues. So we were able to deal with all of those, and we did a lot of triangulations. What that meant is that you looked at different sources of information, okay, and we looked at documentary evidence. We look at the kind of evidence you can't really check. And as the panel said, we said with the available information before us, we don't know if we get something else tomorrow that changes that position. But as long as we can see, and we see records that are untampered, so there are things, and there are inmates. You speak to different inmates, and there are things that we saw. So yes, we saw that there was no evidence showing that he did not sleep in the custody, their center. But we saw evidence of so much or so many privileges that he had. And part of the confusion from what the feedback we were getting from the correctional officers was that because he presented a peculiarity that they have never seen before, okay? Because they knew they could not expose him to other inmates because of the way he is, okay? And there were also other things. But we also saw all of that, and we put all of the list. It's quite a long list in the report. We listed all of the privileges he had in the medium security correctional center, all of the privileges he had in the maximum correctional center, maximum security correctional center, Krikri. The next phase is to look at whether money exchange hands. That is, as you know, no, we haven't done that. That is the next phase, and I will speak to you about that, because, and it is not just about Bobrisky. We want to also make sure are there others in the system, so that we understand what the problem. Because we also saw a lot of things. We saw the fact that lack of adequate resources for the correctional center, what is making or pushing them into. So there are a lot of things we want to see from a very comprehensive eye to understand what are the areas that are more susceptible to corruption. If you know, that's part of the mandate of the panel, and what needs to be done to stop it. So we are looking at the root causes of these issues, so that we will not be where we are now, going forward.
I want us to talk about human rights abuses in the correctional centers. What has been your observation? Of course, you are well grounded in our area of discussion this morning. What has been your observation? And I would say that this has given you opportunity to look at what is happening in our correctional centers. Would you say that we are beginning to learn in terms of human rights that those persons are still human beings, despite the fact that they are there for certain reasons?
The problem with us is, as a nation, is that we are obsessed. We are obsessed with imprisonment. We are obsessed with what we think that putting people in prison would do. And the saddest part of it is A lot of people do not understand the people who you find in custody. Do you know there are people who are innocent there? Do you know there are people who are minor offenders? And of course, as I always tell people, there are people who are serious offenders. Even the police have not found out all of the offenses they committed. Okay? Now, when you are having all of this mixed, it is not only complicated, but you are just shooting yourself on the feet. Because what you are doing is that you are brewing and breeding more criminal minds. Why do I say that? Imagine an innocent person plus one who is a minor offender being in the same overcrowded environment with a more serious offender. All they need to do, they just teach them the trade. And they tell them, when you go out, you just go and see my guy who is outside there, he will fix you. And that the guy is going to bring them to more criminal culture, which is wrong. So what we need to do, and I think the Honorable Minister also hinted on this not too long ago, we need to change our processes whereby everything is about imprisonment. The judiciary need to get that out of their head, that prison does not work. It puts a lot of pain. I'm not talking about money alone. If I tell you to calculate money now, you'll be amazed how much the government is spending on feeding. And I hope you will realize that there is now the placement of the correctional service in what is called the concurrent legislative list, in the dwelling declaration in the constitution, which means the states should now begin to play a role in terms of the management of and feeding also of inmates. The point here is we are overusing this. So part of what you are talking about, the human rights issue, is when you have a facility that is overstretched. So there is no way this will not continue in terms of human rights violation. And I always tell people, Section 35, subsection 5 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the proviso to it is part of our problem, because there we have already seen that they say when you arrest somebody, a maximum of 24 hours, the highest 48 hours, you should take the person to court. But that same provision in the Constitution provided a proviso in terms of certain types of offenses. Okay. So those types of offenses means that if the police, for example, wants to keep you, he would either tell you it's murder, terrorism, or whatever, even if you don't understand how that offense came about, because that means you would stay there much. And when you are charging somebody for an offense that you do not have the ingredient to prove, you just say investigation is still going on, and meanwhile that person will be there 6 years. There are people without going to court at all, so that what other violation is more than that? If you look at the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019, Section 2, sub 1A to D clearly tells you the objective, and the first objective says that the reason for this law is to enable us to comply with international human rights standards and good correctional practices. And the question is that how are we doing that because of all of these violations? You find a situation where the quality of food becomes a problem. You find a situation where link with the family becomes a problem. A situation where even transportation of people to court becomes a problem, and all of the nature of the facility. When you are in prison, if you had a job, you are likely going to lose it. If you had accommodation, your landlord is likely going to throw you out. If you had marriage or relationship, is likely going to be stretched. If there was any income you are bringing into your family or into the society, of that's going to be stopped.
So it means it has to be spot on.
Yes, and when you come back, all of these things that have been broken makes it more difficult for you to live a spiritual life.
This may actually fall outside the purview of what we are discussing this morning, but because of one or two things you've mentioned, if you could cast your mind back, you will remember where the federal government under President Bola Tinubu had to step in the issue of underaged minors in relation to the End Bad Governance protests that were at the cusp of being charged and maybe convicted for treason and all of the charges which were brought against them. That to me appears to be the very first time it's happening, according to what we have seen around. I don't know if
very first time what is happening.
I mean, underaged, charged for treason, sent into the same correctional centers as those who committed bigger crimes. Now, I want to find out, did you see similar circumstances there which may have emboldened the government to take that stand?
On the 8th of October this year, our organization Power in partnership with the UNICEF and the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, National Human Rights Commission, Legal Aid Council, and the National Bureau of Statistics made a presentation of a report which is tied to the National Assessment of Children and Young Adults deprived of their in conflict with the law and deprived of their liberty. Prawa in the last 1 year have visited custodial centers across the whole of the country, as well as remand homes in 29 states, and we collected data. And what their data is showing is that we have young persons in adult facilities. And let me explain what is happening here.
Okay.
The Nigerian Correctional Service has what is young offenders facility, which is called a bostel. Bostel is where you keep young offenders, and currently there are 3 functional ones in the country, and I'm going to tell you the location of them. The 4th one is not operational. Those 3, one is in Kaduna, Kakuri. The 2nd is in Ilori, Kwara State. The 3rd is in Abeokuta, Ogun State. Abeokuta, Ogun State, that is southwest. Already you know where is it not central, southwest, where is Kwara?
Yeah.
Then you see the Kaduna is in the northwest. So in the whole of the south, southeast, and even a good portion, even northeast, you do not have a functional bus. You did not have a functional bus. The only other bus that you have is in Enugu, but it has nothing. Nobody's there. The facilities are run down. So what this means is that where will young offenders that are in Nigerian Correctional Service be put? So what happens is this, because within the provision of the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019, this is one of the factors that the officer in charge of a correctional center can use and say, I am not accepting somebody you have brought. There are 4 things that he can say no to you. One is if his custodial center have exceeded the capacity of that custodial center, and they have activated what they call the early warning signal by writing to the chief judge, attorney general, and the rest of them, and 3 months have passed and these people do nothing. When you bring again an inmate, the superintendent should say that they are not taken, and if they take the person, that again should be liable for sanction. However, some of them are violating that they are not keeping to this. But so that is one condition when they can say no, that they will not take somebody you have brought with a valid warrant into their custody. The second is if the person is underage, because a correctional officer is in charge of the facility should say, I am not taking. Even the act says they can also seek a professional advice to check the age of the person. The third is when the person has been tortured, they can say no, or when the person has come unconscious. Okay. Now, what then happens is that the policing agency that have arrested, because they want you to, and remember, because there is no adequate facility for young offenders in the states or most of the regions, they will go and exaggerate the age of the person, and then what they need to do is to tell the consensus that look at the age, and that was why in our statistics we used what we call also young adults. Because many of those people came in being underage, but their warrant were put as something else. And I'm telling you, the population is you cannot believe the kind of number we're talking about. Then you have remand homes. Do not forget that it's also remand homes that the Child Rights Act have provided, but many of the states don't have. Abia State, for example, does not have. So there are about 29 states in the country that have remand homes. Those remand homes, many of them have their own challenges, not functioning properly. So you see that we seem not to be very aware about what we need to do in terms of juvenile justice. And this is the reason we must do something around this, and also do a lot to prevent offending behavior. You can do a lot in the community to make sure that the young person does not get into that side, not to talk of what the kind of thing you are seeing.
Very interesting conversation, and if you haven't learned anything so far, I wonder what you've been listening to. It is the platform, the pinnacle of all discussions. We open the phone lines now. I've reserved one question for the latter, so when it's time I will unravel that and have my guest respond to it. 0808-182-6949 or 0811-605-2949 or 0811-605-2949. We're live on Facebook, facebook.com/Flow949FM. Go to Facebook and equally drop your comment, and let's get to feel your pulse after we return. It is still the platform, the pinnacle of all discussions. 0808-226-949 or 0811-605-2949. A bit about complaints now, and then I'll read out the numbers and channels you can actually reach out to them. Can people bring complaints to your panel in terms of what is happening? Maybe they have areas of concern. There are equally places they want you to visit in terms of what is happening or what must have happened to them. Can they go about doing that?
Yeah, actually, the investigative panel have actually called out. They have a dedicated email where people will send their complaints. There is also an address to send the complaints to in writing, and we have phone numbers in case if you have an issue. And the part is that currently we are calling that people should submit complaint between now and the 1st of December. So we need this complaint as soon as possible, and the idea is also that by the 12th and 13th of December we will have a public hearing to listen to some of this. Then from the 13th of January to the 25th of January 2025 will also be another public hearing. So please, this is important, because if we don't have the complaint, we will not be able to understand fully. So if you have your rights have been violated, or you have been tortured, or there is issues about corruption that was perpetrated by a correctional service officer or by the correctional service itself, do send your complaint. Do send also your memorandum of submission on any issue you would think that the panel should look into, please.
Okay, so you can submit that via mail, investigative.panel@interior.gov.ng, or send physical copies as well to the chairperson, investigative panel on alleged corruption and other violations against the Nigerian Correctional Service Office of the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Interior, Old Secretariat, Area 1, Gariki, Abuja. Before we go, we are actually out of time. How confident are you? I'll take the number later. How confident are you that the hard work you and the panel are putting into finding out some of the lapses and the anomalies associated with Nigerian Correctional Service, that when you are done with all of these and you bring your recommendations to the table, that the Ministry of Interior and other persons working alongside him will implement all of this for the betterment of the Nigerian Correctional Service and of course the inmates who are there?
This is a very important question you've asked, and that is why, in terms of the strategy, we are doing a lot of consultations and hoping that it's not just about sending the report. We will need to begin to put a lot of pressure to make sure that the implementation of those are done. And in terms of implementation, there will be things that can be done even by different platform organizations. And I give you an example. We're hoping that associations, for example, the National Association of Clinical Psychology, Association of Psychiatrists in Nigeria, Medical Association, Nigerian Bar Association, and all of that, can come in and talk about how they can engage with this process and provide service across the length and breadth of Nigeria. So the point here is that there is a place for the government to put leadership and put board funding towards making this being realized. There are places that other stakeholders should put in. The media, for example, it will also play a very critical role in terms of ensuring that you put your searchlight on your spotlight on these issues. The Honorable Minister have said he is very, very much committed to this, and I think if you see the kind of thing he has done in immigration, you will see what he has clinically done and turned the face of that sector within a short time. And we're hoping that he will be able to put that level of energy and commitment. And if he doesn't, you and I and the rest of Nigeria should make sure that happens. We also think that the way this process is going, it should encourage both the private sector, the civil society, and everyone to just put their hands to make sure that we do the right thing in the country.
And in terms of the number for call and WhatsApp, you can reach them via 0813-297-9406 or 0811-886-5080. Still the numbers 0908-375-7353 or Airtel 0911-769-1288. 80. Let's get your parting shot, Doctor, before we leave the studio.
I think that I just want to plead that everyone see whatever they can do within their own sphere of influence, to help change the narrative in terms of what we do within our justice and security sector. There's a lot of things to do. There is a lot of reforms that we need to put in place. So across board, both the judiciary, the policing agencies, the prosecuting agencies, the general public, the correctional service, and the media, need to do anything they are able to do. It is a ticking time bomb. And I think that if we all work together and see it as a collective responsibility, perhaps we will get nearer to where we ought to be.
Well, we've come to the end of the platform, the pinnacle of all discussions. Quite an interesting conversation we've had so far this morning. The network have been iffy. My guest, Dr. Ojo Agomo, Executive Director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action Power, Executive Committee Member of the African Security Sector Network, Member, United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture, and like I said, Member and Secretary, the Independent Investigative Panel on the alleged corruption, abuse of power, torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment against the Nigerian Correctional Service. Let me sincerely appreciate you for coming on the platform this morning.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you, the whole of the staff and management and leadership of Flow FM. Thank you.
Thank you. This is where we will draw the curtain. We'll make a return same time, same station. Come next week. Until then, have an amazing weekend and bye-bye.